You open this door with the key of reason. Beyond it is another dimension, a dimension of truth, a dimension of freedom, a dimension of joy. You're moving into the land of both the ideal and the real, of the possible and the actual. You've just crossed over into the capitalist corner.
Where reason meets reality, welcome to the capitalist corner.
Welcome, everybody, to the Capitalist Corner. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz. We have the great Jim Valliant here with us today. Please remember to check out Everyday Ethics at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and then Crime, Corrections, and Culture at 3:15 p.m. Eastern Time. Both are on this channel. And also, please remember that super chats, super stickers, all very, very, very much appreciated. So, Jim wrote an article that was published in the Capitalist magazine, or Capitalism magazine, and it's called Objectivism Applied to Immigration Law, and he's here to talk about it. I'm going to ask him what I think are some challenging questions, but please understand this is not a debate, so if I don't challenge him on something or if I don't push, please don't take that to be assume agreement or disagreement with any of Jim's claims. All right, Jim, or any of Jim's arguments. Jim, welcome.
Howdy. I know you object to my use of this Western colloquialism, howdy, but howdy, partner.
Partner. All right. So you start off and you say that immigration authorities are enforcing a law badly in need of reform does not alter the fact that ICE officers are valid agents of law enforcement and must be treated accordingly. You know what, though, Jim? Before I do that, I want to address this, because this seems to have gotten some attention because it's objectivism as applied to immigration. So I'm going to get to that other question in a second. I got two first that I want to ask. Firstly, you wrote this. Students of objectivism who oppose any border enforcement or who advocate that there should be no deportations, whatever, are simply ignoring objectivist political philosophy. Then you say this. It should be noted that there is no objectivist position on the proper nature and scope of immigration law, and that this is my own application of objectivist principles to the topic. Now, I love you, Jim, but I have to concede that I understand why folks were confused by this. I was not, but the reason I, of course, have an inside lane here, and you and I have discussed this particular issue ad nauseum in private discussions. So can you just clarify why this isn't a contradiction where you say, if you don't take this position, you're not understanding, but yet this is not the objectivist position?
Well, objectivism is the philosophy defined by Ayn Rand, and it is Ayn Rand's words and philosophy and principles. It is no more and no less. And so even if something, but Ayn Rand did not discuss every issue under the sun. And so if one sees what might be a straightforward application of objectivism, but one that Ayn Rand did not herself say anything about, write about, then, of course, what we have to do is apply it ourselves. And there is only one right answer. There's only one correct application of objectivist principles to any new issue. But if it's a new issue, it can't be objectivism. You know, Leonard Peikoff, when he wrote his masterful treatise, Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, right up front said, look, Ayn Rand has not read this. This cannot be considered official objectivism. And if anything written after Ayn Rand or not by Ayn Rand could be considered objectivism, in my view, it's that book. But even in that book, where he took great pains to only include things he was certain Ayn Rand in his own mind would agree with, but it's in his own mind. Right. He knew Ayn Rand didn't review it. So there is no objectivist official position on a great many things, even though the application of it. Now, I think objectivism provides the answers. In fact, straightforward answers to most questions. But there are all kinds of new issues that come up in the future. And those issues, when we come up with it in the future, we can't say, well, that's the objectivism, my application of it, even if it seems like a straightforward, application of it. So one can both ignore objectivist principles, claim to be an objectivist, have a position, and if that position is a wrong application of it, it's the wrong application of it. On the other hand, neither my refutation of that or the person's position can be considered objectivism. Not even the right application, the
Yes.
one and only one correct application of objectivism is being articulated. Even the right one isn't objectivism.
Yes, basically, Jim, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's objectivism has implications beyond objectivist doctrine.
It applies
Right.
to everything under the sun.
Right. But we can't be sure that Ayn Rand would have seen the implication the way that we see it. It's not her formulation, so cannot be objectivism. So, for instance, while you argue that this is the correct application, I could just as legitimately in the sense of being not part of objectivism, I could say, look, I'm an open borders guy. Objectivism implies that. And you would think I was wrong in the implication, but neither one of us would be lacking in integrity or misstating anything or.
Well, we could, I suppose.
No, but I'm saying, but just by that statement
neither
alone.
of us are articulating objectivism.
Right.
Both of us are applying it. So they're our applications, John Smith's application versus Peter Jones' application, or Jim Valliant's application. So the applications, correct or otherwise, are not objectivism.
Right.
Similarly, Ayn Rand wrote about abortion, the draft, environmentalism. She wrote about so many things under the sun, the FCC, antitrust laws, inflation, wage and price controls. Of course, you and I both know the range of things that Ayn Rand wrote about. She never felt it necessary to write about immigration law, unfortunately. There's an answer in a Q&A. She really doesn't specify, the details of what proper immigration law should or should not be. She's generally pro-immigration, but she never felt it such an oppression like abortion or the draft or something, or wage and price controls, as such an oppression that she needed to go out of her way to write about it, as she did say the FCC or antitrust laws. You got my point.
Yeah. So another thing I kind of want to push back on a little bit, that you just clarified one of them, because it was going to be her answer at the Ford Hall Forum in relation to.
Well, I think it's a really good answer because it shows that she's generally pro-immigration, and that this guy was misapplying egoism. Now, the term open borders doesn't have the meaning it does today, 60 years later, 50 years later, whatever the time frame is. I mean, it wasn't the hot button issue that it is today, for example. And the meaning of open borders was not, abolish ICE as it is today. So I would just urge caution especially with an extemporaneous Q&A answer, when she was really focused on the misapplication of egoism by the questioner.
Right. Okay. So you said that there's only one correct application to immigration. I disagree, and let me just tell you why, and see what you say. So there might be, for instance, any number of variations on due process. For instance, like you might say, well, when somebody applies to come in the country, it's a minimum 6-week wait, it's a minimum 4-week wait. Objectivism wouldn't give us anything there. Objectivism could not specify, what types of questions should be asked, or rather, what specific questions should be asked for somebody to become a citizen. I just mean that there's a variety of potential correct applications.
I agree with that. I agree with that in general terms. I would, objectivism is such an amazing tool. It really is, because it does help provide answers, and it's very for me, it's really easy to slip into objectivism, if applied properly, could give us the answer to, what I should have for lunch today. And of course, objectivism does not go that far. But when it comes to certain issues, they can give us let me put it this way. Philosophical principles can give us the parameters, the limits, the bumpers on it. But, is there a right or wrong answer is a more specific thing.
Yeah,
so
like it could tell us, for instance, in criminal law, jury trials are necessary.
Right.
It can't tell us that we need to have 6 jurors, 9 jurors, 12 jurors.
Right, but there's a best number for jurors, isn't there? And so I would still
in
say
general, I would say no. Applied to a specific case, maybe, because it might be 6 for one, 9 for another.
Well, there could be too many,
sure.
Exactly. Those are the parameter type questions. But then, without getting into the non-philosophical details that might be relevant in terms of the number, let me put it that way.
Yeah.
And sometimes we can't identify. This would take, age of consent laws. Are we being arbitrary if we say 18 rather than 17? At a certain point there, I may not be able to distinguish what the exactly correct answer might be, but still it gives me a pretty good idea.
Okay. So you've said that the purpose of government, of course, I agree, is to protect individual rights.
The sole purpose of government.
And you say that necessarily includes a border, some sort of immigration laws. In objectivism, the initiation of force is evil. I don't know, but there's not a better word. Immoral, you can say that, whatever. So how is it not initiating force against somebody to stop them while they're moving freely, asking them for their information, their criminal history, or anything else? All the information that you need in order to scan them to come into the country. That's what I mean.
Well, in fact, because they're coming from someplace that we have not monitored at all, they could potentially be, and here the statistics are really relatively unimportant. We treat, I think the general principle to understand here is, even though let's forget the immigration context for a second, even though criminals themselves represent a small minority of the population, and boy, as a DA, did I have to learn that. I'm getting exposed to a very slim, cross section. Don't let that affect my view of humanity. But the statistics are also clear. A small minority of people commit a clear majority of the crimes. But it's an individualized thing. If crime rates are going down, that doesn't mean I ignore a particular instance of crime, does it?
No.
I want every single victim to be protected, that every single victim can be protected from, and because they're coming from a place, we've been vetted here in the United States. We're constantly being vetted by the police. We're vetted constantly because we're under the jurisdiction of our local law enforcement. If we commit a crime, we get the punishment for it. When people are abroad, they're not tabula rasa when they walk to the borders. They have pasts, just like people have pasts here in the United States. And so if a person is a rap sheet here in the United States, we treat them, as you personally know, we treat them in a variety of ways differently the minute they start developing a rap sheet. And so what do? We treat them differently the minute they start having a rap sheet. If you're convicted of a felony and you haven't had that felony reduced, guess what? You cannot possess a gun in the United States. And I'm talking about native-born citizens. It is a felony, an unreducible felony in, I believe, every jurisdiction, state and federal too, for a felon to possess a firearm in the United States. And so what happens with a criminal conviction is you start losing rights. Now, as I say, people abroad are not tabula rasa. They have their own histories. Unfortunately, they're also coming from political jurisdictions that are very, very different from ours. Some of them are anarchistic. Some of them, or in some Muslim countries, for example, as everyone knows, the definitions of rape and murder are different. Or they may come from a system where they throw political prisoners, dictatorships, where they throw political prisoners simply for their political speech in prison. So we need to make an independent evaluation of these people and their histories before they come in, just as we monitor criminals in the United States for their histories. If take, for example, someone's on criminal probation in the United States, we restrict their freedom of movement all the time. If you're on felony probation, we tell you where you can live, who you can live with. We can be very strict about your freedom of movement. Well, what if a person's on probation, say, from a foreign country? Do we monitor them like a probation officer would? Or we just give them a tabula rasa clean slate? Or let's just say that they're a felon who wouldn't be able to possess a firearm in the United States because they were convicted of the equivalent of a felony. We have every right to protect the people in the United States from this unknown coming in here. Adults are not tabula rasa. They can have criminal histories.
Yeah.
We can't treat domestic criminals worse than we would treat people coming from abroad. They should be given the same kind of treatment.
Okay, so there's a couple things, Jim, that I want to touch on, and I'm just going to name them all rather than ask one, and I'm just going to go through a few of them first. So first of all, the people that you're talking about in America, they're already known to be criminals. as you don't get checked every time you go to a new state or every time you go to a new town to verify that you're not a criminal.
Well, in some cases, lifetime registration, sex offenses, serious sex offenses.
That's true, but you still
lifetime registration.
That's true, but you would only be checked if you went into a situation where you were supposed to be checked. You understand? I go if I'm going right now, if I go to Massachusetts today or next week, I'm going to New York City. They don't stop me and say, "Hey, are you a convicted felon?"
No.
The second thing is this: is you touched on something that was very important to me, is that the other systems of law and enforcement of other countries, how we could even do what you're suggesting in a lot of these places. They may have criminal records because they lived in unjust governments.
Right.
So you're going to deprive them of their freedom by telling them you can't come here.
No. I would
on that.
I would use our standards of what a crime is, not their standards. In other words, that requires us to impose upon immigrants not the conditions that their government imposed upon them. We have to look past the BS of political crimes, and we have to look sometimes past the BS of their definition of murder and rape. So I would use our standards of what a rights violation, our standards of what a threat to individual
rights. But how would you know is my question, Jim.
Well, it requires some kind of investigation. And if we can't know, then there's good reason to do a further investigation. In some cases, there's so many different angles that this brings up. But the point is that if someone does have...
Hold on one second. Greg, thank you for the $1.99 and happy birthday, sir.
Yes, Greg Lewis, happy birthday,
yes.
Sir. In any case, we have just as we have, all these secondary consequences to criminal conviction here. I mean, some jurisdictions you can't vote, and some jurisdictions you can't serve on juries. I mean, when you look at that, the way we use prior criminal history to do what? To determine the sentence on the next felony. So we have to keep and maintain rap sheets. And that is not a violation of anyone's rights to keep and maintain. You say, well, it's preventative. Yeah, well, it's preventative.
Okay, hold on one second. Just hold on, because this is important, Jim, I think. So in all those cases, you already know somebody has committed an offense. You're keeping the rap sheet, you're whatever, depriving them of this or this or that. In that case, the person who comes here, is my mic working okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think.
No, I just wanted to make sure because my hearing is a little messed up. Okay, so in those cases, so if a convicted felon, for instance, goes to vote in a jurisdiction where he can't, he'd be denied. If the convicted felon went to buy a firearm in a jurisdiction that doesn't allow it, he'd be denied. The same could happen for somebody in an immigrant. If that person comes here to do something, you could do the same types of checks to stop them. But also, if people are innocent until proven guilty, which we hold, that's sacrosanct, then you're stopping people coming in, and you have no reason to, other than that they're coming from somewhere, another country.
We don't know. And we have to treat that I don't know as an I don't know. See, you going to New York or Massachusetts is very different. The 50 states, basically, we've had so much of our rights federalized, fortunately, I think, over the last century by the Supreme Court, that we have a sort of federalized criminal procedure system. And more than that, the Constitution requires extradition. And the federal law requires the sharing of criminal information from state to state. When I was a DA, we could, if I wanted an Arizona prior, let's say, to enhance a sentence on someone, getting it from Arizona was a whole lot easier than getting it from the Republic of Mexico. And when it came from the Republic of Mexico, we'd have to have a whole new legal procedure to say, okay, did he get proper due process? What was the nature of the crime? Some places won't respect extradition, for example, is a matter of treaty. Individual treaties with individual nations. Some nations ignore it. Some nations are pretty good about it. But even places like Great Britain, they won't extradite murderers to the United States until we promise we won't subject them to the death penalty, for example. So the compliance with extradition laws is not the same as states must, under the Constitution, comply with extradition laws. Our knowledge of what the conviction means in Massachusetts means that it comes under, it was okay under the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Bill of Rights. Under the Fifth Amendment, under the Sixth Amendment, I don't have that same confidence I have that confidence with Massachusetts versus New York and Connecticut. I do not have that and cannot have that same confidence when it's a foreign country. You can just see even the differences between Britain and the United States suggest that it requires an independent inquiry. And yes, we have to do that. Look, the immigration problem is because we have arbitrary limits on the total number of people who can come in every year. That is set by law. We also have ridiculous limits. Only 7% of immigrants can come in from any one country in any 1 year. So depending on your status, whether you have a family member or it's just a work thing, the wait lists on visas, 10 to 30 years. There could be more than 30 million people pending green card permanent residency applications. That is not the result of any criminal investigation or background check, which we have every right to do. I mean, take it, and it's not a question of moral status of the person. A person could have tuberculosis, let's say, and once upon a time, tuberculosis was a very serious thing because we did not have good treatments for it. And so we would contain the person rather than let them in to be a typhoid Mary of this potentially deadly contagious disease. We would say, no, you're a physical threat to the interior population. And so until you are overdone with your tuberculosis, you don't come into this country. It's not a question of even the moral status of the individual. Are they a threat is the question. When you're coming in from the great unknown, which is the world around us today, and we have to be realistic about what the world is today, America has every right to do an individualized investigation. That is not what's causing the great line around the block to get into America or the backup. Trust me. But is that inquiry, is this person a physical threat to the people inside the United States, still something the government ought to do? Yes, it is to protect us from physical threats that the government exists, its sole function. It would be, in fact, irresponsible to pretend that that the people coming in aren't like the people already here, potentially with rap sheets. The effect of that rap sheet, criminals become, I do not see the government as a paternal daddy, but when you start committing crimes, you do become a charge to the state. That is to say, career criminals become a lifetime of work for the government. And there's no question about that, and require constant monitoring. When a cop is doing an investigation and he sees that one of the suspects has a record for doing the same kind of thing on his rap sheet, do you think it's rational for the detective to follow up on, hey, maybe it's this guy who's done it 3 times before among our suspects? Yeah, it makes sense. Without that, we're giving foreigners a better treatment than we give everyone else who's in this country. That would be totally unfair to the people in this country, for one thing, but it would also be a physical risk to the people in this country. To pretend to ignore that people come in tabula rasa would be absolutely a danger. And as I say, I look at crime in an individualized way. I became a DA. Crime had been persistently high for a couple of decades. And so I joked around because the minute I became a DA, crime started dropping in Southern California. And I said, see, I'm a DA. I've caused a drop. No. But no matter how the crime rate was dropping through the 1990s, and I wasn't responsible, I promise you, no matter how much crime was dropping, did that put me off my guard when it came to individual criminals? No. Each individual case is still important to handle, regardless of the declining crime statistics. It would be a misuse of statistics to say, well, criminals are only a minority, or the crime rate is dropping, or, in this neighborhood, they don't have a lot of crime, so let's ignore crime there. What? That would be totally insane. Each crime is important. Each physical threat is important, but it is only threats to someone's physical well-being that is the business of government.
Okay, so there's a lot of good questions in the chat, but I don't want to interrupt my flow in order to get to those. So I will get to those at the end, but super chats come first, just so you guys know. All right, so a problem I had kind of, Jim, with the article is that objectivism is a philosophy. So we take, philosophical positions, which tend to be more abstract, and then you have to apply them to specific concretes. But in the article, you seem to how do I say it? I'm gonna use this the ICE thing as an example of what I'm talking about in a minute, because you write this. So you would agree with me, for instance, that immigration is unconstitutional. Federal immigration laws are unconstitutional.
Well, you asked
agree
a
with me that.
constitutional question. It's a no-brainer.
Right. But you also say that, practically, look, the FBI has been established unconstitutionally. There's so much that's unconstitutional that the Supreme Court, which is also a part of our system, has approved, that it's a virtual mess, right? I mean, it's an actual mess.
I spent my entire career as a DA working within a system I thought was corrupt constitutionally, and having to deal with and work with laws that I thought were unconstitutional or immoral, and I just had to swallow hard. But the moral evaluation of a policy should be distinct. We have to run this split screen, our constitutional analysis.
Okay.
If necessary, I would advocate a constitutional amendment. But because we have 150 years of precedent, so I don't see the immigration precedents from the Supreme Court changing anytime soon. Not in my lifetime,
No.
Mr. Liebowitz. And so within that, how would I advocate laws, given the Supreme Court's part of our constitutional system too? The Supreme Court has greenlit immigration laws since 1875. And so within that, I will say, well, what is the... And so I would reform. I call even under the.
I think it was 76, but I won't push too hard.
Mid 1870s. But in any event, I think the first law was passed in 1875. Anyway, within that, what is the moral policy? And if the Supreme Court were to go back to sanity, which I would advocate going back to a more sane thing, I'd advocate a constitutional amendment, and if necessary. So I'm morally evaluating what the correct policy ought to be, regardless of constitutionality. But, like I said, with the FBI, when they catch a bank robber or a kidnapper or bring down an organized crime organization, I cheer, even though I think that the FBI itself and those federal criminal statutes are also unconstitutional. They are under the Commerce Clause. In fact, it seems to me that under the Foreign Commerce Clause, you might have a more plausible argument for immigration being constitutional. This was not what the basis of it, mind you, the Supreme Court, when they upheld this. But it would seem you'd have a better case in immigration under the ability for the Congress to regulate foreign commerce than you would, say, the FBI under the Domestic Commerce Clause. But believe me, that's how they justify it.
All right. So here's the passage, and this is what I mean, because this is it says objectivism applied to immigration law, and this is where it gets tricky for me. Because you say that immigration authorities are enforcing a law badly in need of reform does not alter the fact that ICE officers are valid agents of law enforcement and must be treated accordingly. But if immigration laws are unconstitutional, it seems to me that anything passed that are contrary to the Constitution, which would include enforcement, would not be valid. So what do you mean when you say they're valid law enforcement?
Well, the local cops are valid law enforcement. I think we get general agreement from objectivists that your local police and sheriff's departments, your local highway patrol are valid.
But Jim, I want to just stop you for 1 second. The local police, although they do, sometimes uphold bad laws.
Drug laws are what they're doing almost half the time.
Right. But ICE is specifically established for the purpose of enforcing unconstitutional laws.
So their whole existence hinges on whether it's morally valid. So
okay, that's what I want you to do, is clarify what you mean by valid.
But let's say the cop pulls me over suspecting that I'm possessing drugs. Do I physically resist the cop? I would say that's A, non-egoistic. But B, also not the way I think you reform laws. There are moments when civil disobedience, if you're making a big point, you want to make a legal test case, you want to raise the consciousness of the community. I'm saying civil disobedience has a place. But if you were to say my physical resistance of a specific arrest of a cop who's doing a drug investigation, I should physically resist him, I would say that's stupid. That's not going to reform the law. What you do is you comply with the officer's, under our existing law, his lawful orders. I would say don't fight it on the street, fight it in court where we fight these things. Call for reform in other ways. And besides, It's not going to be some protest, some stunt that's going to change the law. It's going to be a change in the culture, an educational change, philosophical change in the political culture. So
Jim,
ideas that change in reform laws, not us physically resisting.
I agree. I agree with not physically resisting in the current context. My question has to do with saying that ICE is valid, because obviously constitutionally it's not valid. So in what sense?
Under existing law, under the
that's what I want you to explain. Why do you say that they're valid?
If the Supreme Court makes a bad decision, I live with that bad decision. Right. That is more important to me than the Supreme Court making a mistake. The Supreme Court makes mistakes, but to keep our constitutional system intact for the future, it is even more important, a meta value, that we comply. That, say, for example, Donald Trump. A real test for him, in my view, because he does not understand the Constitution and has expressed repeatedly contempt for the Constitution. Even recently, you pointed out the contempt he expresses for the Constitution. So the test for me for Donald Trump is he obeying court orders? And if he should start flagrantly violating Supreme Court orders, that would be an impeachable offense of greater consequence than, say, his pushing the envelope on a particular issue and getting it tested by the court. I'm a defender of our system in general, until and unless we're ready to go for American Revolution 2.0. And there, so long as we have a peaceful means of changing the system, we have no censorship, let's say, no real censorship. Then we shouldn't, and once you start physically resisting law enforcement, you can't expect anything from them. It's a war. It's a civil war between you and the government. Thereafter, it's cops versus people, okay? An army versus people, maybe. So I don't want a civil war to break out. I want there to be a peaceful change in our direction. And the structure that is so much superior to anything we have today is that constitutional system we got from our founders. I'm protecting that in general. Now, of course, the parameters over time have grown. So it's gotten worse and worse. At some point, it gives, I grant you, like with censorship. But until and unless that happens, I'm afraid we have to work within what the Supreme Court tells us is the law. And so if you were to say Congressman Jim, as opposed to Supreme Court Justice Jim, Congressman Jim would say, well, let's get some reforms of the visa system, the way ICE does its work, et cetera, which I find, look at Congress today. They're holding up DHS funding, and they're not even negotiating for reforms. If I was a Democrat in Congress right now, I would be saying, hey, are you willing to negotiate some due process reforms for ICE? Democrats don't seem interested in reforms for ICE. They just want to make a political point, which is unfortunate.
All right. So what specifically, now, you know what? I'm going to get to that afterwards. I'm going to get to that at the end. That's going to be my last question. So you say that if a person is an accessory to a violation of rights, that also constitutes a crime. I know. I spent 25 years in prison for it. Okay, if a private property owner, for example, were to allow bank robbers onto his property and knowingly harbor them, the government would have every right and responsibility to enter that property, to retrieve the criminals, and even to prosecute the owner of that property for harboring known criminals. That is, as an accessory to those crimes. If the government were to ignore the property owner's harboring of such criminals, it would have failed in its responsibility to protect everyone's rights. Similarly, if the government were to ignore the criminal actions of immigrants to this country, it would in effect be harboring violators of rights and failing in its responsibility to protect individual rights. What I want to know is this, because it wasn't clear to me. Are you saying that if a private business hires illegal immigrants, that the government is morally okay for the government to go into that private business to apprehend those immigrants and to arrest the owner of that business?
That is fundamentally a due process question. In the 1980s, they got very aggressive.
No, I'm not letting you get away with that, Jim. I want to know morally.
Right. Morally. Well, let me back up. If there is a valid vetting process, then those who simply evade the vetting process should be deportable.
No,
right.
I'm saying right now.
Right. Well, right now. See, that's why I would say that we need due process. There is a Fourth Amendment, and the Fourth Amendment for a Home Depot business owner should be no different than it is for everyone else. And so, yeah, I myself, see, you've brought up a case that invokes something else. Should administrative searches and these regulatory warrants, that is what Trump is trying to do. Now, that I don't like the whole exception of administrative warrants. They shouldn't happen when they're coming in for building code inspections. But to have a different standard under the Fourth Amendment for economic regulations, say building code inspections, is wrong. And it would be wrong to apply it in the immigration case as well. But my problem there is with the Fourth Amendment exception for administrative searches, not with immigration law. In other words, you could have a valid immigration law, with bad due process rules about administrative searches. What my focus there would be reform the whole Fourth Amendment exception that says there's administrative searches. So you combine two issues. For example, the need for due process reform. You could do that with any law, valid or invalid. A law that needs reform, say, simply one that needs some changes. Add in the due process problem of, say, administrative searches, and now my focus is over on administrative searches. No, get rid of all of them. Under the existing, again, the Supreme Court is an important part of our system. They've said administrative searches are at a different standard under certain circumstances. Now, they're a little schizophrenic on administrative searches. I grant you, we probably need some greater clarity the way I would discuss the state of Fourth Amendment administrative search law. Hopefully it will not be expanded any further to include immigration laws. Let me put it that way.
Okay, so I want to ask you two questions, and I want you to answer them both. Ideally, meaning in Jim Valliant's world and as currently, within the current constitutional, the precedents, everything, what would you prefer immigration policy to be in both, ideally and in the imperfect world we now live in?
Well, the big part of the imperfect world we now live in are two big parts that are there. We have gone beyond the moral scope of government in filtering people out. Let me put it that way. And there you can see it most egregiously, as I say, in our visa system. We have arbitrary numeric limits, for example. That's just, or you need to have special asylum. See, in my view, there wouldn't be any need for special asylum because peaceful, law-abiding people would be able to come in regardless of whether or not they face threats back at home or not. So I would subsume and get rid of, in effect, the need for asylum laws by allowing the peaceful, law-abiding in once properly vetted. So in my ideal world, the government would have a process whereby at the border they do vet people to see if there is a reason for a further investigation and to delay their entry for that reason so that we can engage in an investigation. And if we can know, if this person represents a harm, if that involves a medical test, if that involves, say, a country where we respect the legal system, say Great Britain, look at their criminal records. If we know they're coming from a place that doesn't keep good criminal records or has a very different view of crime than we do, then obviously we have to take it through different filters. Is this really a crime? Did they get proper due process? Is this, and on a whole range of issues, I would be open. I don't have a specific, for example, should all misdemeanors, if, the equivalent of a misdemeanor crime, should they be excluded versus, say, felons? I am open-minded. Should we allow, DUI, driving under the influence, is generally a misdemeanor until you acquire enough priors that you hurt someone in a DUI. It's generally a misdemeanor. A couple of DUIs. Do you want someone who's repeatedly driven under the influence of alcohol into the country? Do they represent a physical danger to people? Well, I'm open to an assessment of that. How about, obviously, parking tickets would be out. You know what I'm saying? What those crimes are and where we draw the line there. But you see, sometimes we have to penetrate the legal system, the foreign legal system itself. What did they actually do? What do we know they did? And I'll even go further. What if their stated intention is to commit crimes or terrorism? What if they belong to Hezbollah? What if they belong to ISIS? and they say, and we know that they're affiliated with ISIS or Hezbollah, should we allow them into the country? I say no. Their stated intentions were good enough for me as a criminal conviction in that sense, even though we wouldn't convict them of the crime here. Let's say you started advocating Hezbollah in the United States. That would not be criminal per se. We're still under the Brandenburg test, for example, when it comes to free speech. But if someone's stated intention is to do terrorism in the United States, or we have good reason to believe they want to engage in terrorism in the United States, we have every reason to. It's just as if someone were to say, it'll never happen in reality. But if someone were to say, look, I'm coming to the United States to engage in criminal operations, they just said so right up front, then I think it would be perfectly valid and reasonable. Oh, well, if you're coming in here to do bank robberies, right, okay, we're going to keep you out. But it's the equivalent, believe it or not, although that's rare, I grant you, there is the equivalent of people who say, no, I want to overthrow the United States government. America is the great Satan. America needs to be taken down. If that is their stated intention, to commit crimes or violence or take down the United States government, I would take them on their word or take them on their institutional affiliation. So the question is not whether they were, I come at it because of my criminal law background with a focus on criminal law, but it's a broader point. It includes, for example, contagious diseases. Is the person reasonably a physical threat to the people inside the United States? In the United States, because it's our jurisdiction, we monitor for these things all the time. So if a person has a deadly contagious disease, can the government, in theory, quarantine that person for the period of time that they're contagious? Yes. So you see, we are monitored. We are vetted for contagious diseases. We are monitored.
But is that right, Jim?
I'm sorry?
Is that right? For instance, you talk about contagious diseases. At what point do we say this is a deadly contagious disease? People die of the flu, I think, all the time. I think it's like 20, 50, whatever thousand a year. So can the government now pass laws restricting people from movement if they have the flu? Who's going to perform these tests?
Well, physical harm, I see, deadly is adding a very high level of standard, isn't it? You are causing physical harm to spread the disease, right? So if I were just to punch you as opposed to kill you, would that be, I'm coming into the country to punch Michael Liebowitz. Does that make it okay as opposed to, I'm coming into the country to kill Michael Liebowitz? That's the difference between deadly and non-deadly disease, right? The functional equivalent.
Well, the problem is a disease like the flu I just mentioned would be deadly for some people, not deadly for others. The chances of someone dying from getting a sock in the nose.
So the analogous equivalent is like, are there some misdemeanors? Certainly traffic offense, parking tickets, we would ignore, right? And so what I'm saying is at the disease level, there's an equivalent, an analogous crime level. So just as I'd ignore parking tickets if someone wanted to come into the United States, so I might ignore common cold, for example. So I'm willing to, but on the other hand, a physical threat is a physical threat and needs to be taken into account. That's all.
Okay. The last question that I'm going to ask, and then we're going to get into, I'm going to go to the chats. It's clear as day to me who we're talking about in this article, right? And the audience knows who we're talking about in this article, by and large. It seems to me that the primary objectivist proponent of open borders is Harry Binswanger. So people in the audience are, Harry Binswanger. Are you in any way, shape, or form saying that people who don't take your position on immigration are not objectivists?
No. I'm not saying that let me put it this way. I don't like people have heard recently, in recent months, that I don't like using the term objectivist. I think the reasons behind Ayn Rand's desire in the 1960s for people to say student of objectivism, support
are very sound reasons.
Are sound reasons.
I agree.
On the other hand, I would not say that someone is repudiating objectivism because they disagree with me about this, because this isn't objectivism. Even if mine is the correct application of objectivism, I wouldn't say that a person has renounced, and is an enemy of objectivism simply because they disagree with me on this point, because my point is not part of objectivism. I think they're wrong.
Right.
I think Harry Binswanger is absolutely naive and not attending to the facts of reality when he says there ought to be nothing but a welcome to America sign when you come in across the Mexican border.
See, this to me is so key, Jim, because I criticized Harry's position on ICE, even though I largely agreed with the conclusions. I thought the reasoning was very flawed. I don't think his position on immigration is the objectivist position, but I've interviewed him twice. I found him to be a very nice guy. I've read some of his stuff that I liked. I find his wife to be absolutely wonderful. My point here is that there tends to be, and I don't know how widespread this is in other communities, but within objectivist and libertarian communities, it's almost like when you take an intellectual disagreement with somebody, now you don't like the person, or now the person is evil.
Geez, objectivist community, can you please take a chill pill? Disagreement does not necessarily imply immorality or dishonesty on the part of the person who's disagreeing with you. If we generally agree about objectivist principles, then I'm going to actually give you quite a lot of slack in terms of my assessment. I respect people's independence. I respect individual context. I've had several disagreements. I've publicly debated Harry Binswanger on homosexuality and Ayn Rand's view of that. I've had my disagreements with Harry Binswanger over the years. That does not mean that you shouldn't find value if there's value to be found in his work, for example. Yes. I mean, that would be insane.
Right. Jim, three of my closest friends in the world, never mind just in the objectivist community, are you, Mark Pellegrino, and Andy Bernstein. I've debated the three of you publicly, right? So
it's almost a test of friendship for me. In other words, if you're just I agree. Oh, come on, you're really not the same friend than if a person disagrees with me. Jim, you're wrong about that. Yeah. Or no, Jim, I need to lodge my. That actually makes you a closer friend. Yeah.
Persephone, and I love Persephone. She's wonderful. So the other day she said something to me, and then later on, and I completely forgot about it. She says, "I'm sorry if I was mean earlier." And I'm like, "What the hell are you talking about? Mean earlier?" And she says, "Well, I said this earlier. And I'm like, do you think I'm made of cotton candy? like what the fuck? Oh, Jesus Christ."
I mean, we've been yelling at each other, red in the face, having an intense argument, and then we walk away. How can you still be friends with that guy? We're closer than ever. What are you talking about?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah. Brent McCall is my absolute closest friend in the world. He and I have had screaming matches.
Knock down, drag out.
Yeah, perfect. So right. What? Right, okay. Right. So Gary Menard with the $9.99 super sticker, or super chat rather. Gary, thank you so much. He said, James, from a legal constitutional lens, what is the source for federal immigration regulation? And if there is no legal constitutional source, how can ICE be valid? And then he's equating valid with legal, I'm assuming, because legal's in parentheses after valid.
Well, the simple question, I think, if it is just contextual to the law, is the Supreme Court has for the last 150 years upheld immigration laws. So that's the constitutional validity. It hinges on the Supreme Court right now. As I say, should the Supreme Court change its mind on the matter, I would need a constitutional amendment. I wish I needed a constitutional amendment on this point. I very much wish the Supreme Court would be sane when it comes to the Commerce Clause and get rid of, they'd have to get rid of the FBI. Certainly the Drug Enforcement Administration, wouldn't they? They'd have to get rid of most of what the government does if we attended properly to the meaning of the Commerce Clause. But more than my lifetime has gone by. I mean, since the 1930s, the Supreme Court has basically thrown in the towel on any limitations of the Commerce Clause. So I work as best I can within the Supreme Court's. So it's the Supreme Court that makes it valid, Gary. And do I wish it were otherwise? Yeah. Do I wish I needed to add a whole thing here? Well, given the Supreme Court's correct and strict application of Section 8, Article 1, I need to call for the name of the article would have been Jim's Call for a Constitutional Amendment. Okay? Yeah. But like I say, with so many policy issues, I have to run a kind of a split screen, like the war with Iran right now. in my view, and Michael can tell you this as well, in my view, this is an utter corruption of the understanding of the separation of powers. But look, this has been a process that's been going on for decades, centuries, and in recent decades has basically been tossed into the sewer. So do I wish it were otherwise? Yes. Wouldn't it be great if a president said, no, I'm drawing the line and I'm changing the precedent now? Yes, that would be the correct thing to do. But what I do is I evaluate policies, the morality of the policy separately from the constitutionality. Is it constitutional in my view? Absolutely not.
Okay, so we're going to get to some more questions here. This is from Ian Gilmore. For James, is preventative law legitimate?
Well, preventative action on the part of law enforcement is necessary, not only legitimate. So you say, well, should we have a detective bureau? Should we maintain rap sheets? Should we, okay, that's preventative. That's preventative. So there's all kinds of preventative action government takes to protect us from crime and the violation of individual rights or physical threats, okay? The question is, can you use force against someone in a preventative way? I think you, Michael, are going to commit action X. So prevent that, I'm going to lock you up before you do it. No. You can't use the preventative idea to violate individual rights. The whole point is to protect individual rights. So any prevention on an individual scale that would violate that person's rights is bad. Should government take all kinds of steps to prevent crime as best as they can? Absolutely.
Repeat that again, Jim, what you just said. Government taking steps to prevent crime. What exactly did you just say?
Government should be taking all kinds of steps to prevent crime.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
I thought you said whatever steps they can. I was going to say, whoa.
Well, yeah, whatever steps they can. But what they cannot do is violate a specific individual's rights, thinking that they're, anticipating their crime. Now, an attempt is, a conspiracy is, but the needs for an attempted crime or a conspiracy to commit crime are very closely watched. Are threats by themselves before violence criminal? Sometimes indeed threats can be criminal in themselves. Is that something that would cause someone to reasonably believe the threat's going to be carried out? Okay. So attempts, conspiracies, threats, one could say those are preventative. I don't think that's preventative because on the other hand, they have to be connected to a specific violation of individual rights. Now, on the other hand, does government take steps to prevent crime that don't violate individual rights all the time? Having a police department is preventative. Keeping and maintaining rap sheets is preventative. Having a technical bureau that can examine DNA is preventative. We can't take any steps that might anticipate crime, so let's not have a crime lab or a police department. That would be, if you tell me, should the government take steps that prevent crime? Yeah. Should this government violate people's rights by restricting their freedom or something because we think in the future they're going to commit crimes? No. And when we think they're going to commit crimes, well, let me put it this way. There is a difference, though, as when a person starts developing a criminal record. And let me add this. I think this is very important. We have very inadequate steps for redemption. It seems to me that our pardon, clemency process are, if you complete misdemeanor probation successfully, you can have it expunged from your record. If you complete felony probation successfully, in many cases, you can have it reduced to a misdemeanor. So we have all kinds of means by which we try and build into the law a way to redeem yourself, and how you apply that into the case of foreigners who maybe reformed their lives and have developed a track record of showing you they're no longer a threat, should be aware of that. So we are woefully inadequate, and one of the things that we need a lot of reform on, and Michael is my poster child case for this, there are many people who dramatically reform and have earned redemption, earned legal forgiveness. When that happens, we should acknowledge it. It's just as important as punishing criminals who have not reformed. But the biggest indicator, human beings are volitional agents. As volitional agents, they're impossible to really predict, aren't they? Our only way of predicting and controlling the danger in the future is by looking at their past behavior. Character matters. A person's moral character is the best, and their previous behavior is their best predictor for what they're going to do in the future. This is why, for example, if a person has a prior record especially a prior record for doing something similar, we enhance the sentence for the next crime. And as you get dramatically more, I've seen the believe me, a good deal of my life was spent taking care of that, people on the rungs of that ladder, going into worse and worse crimes. Because, take domestic violence. A guy, something you would think, oh, that's relatively minor. And to me, no domestic violence is minor. He backhanded slaps a woman. Okay. And you would say, well, she forgives him. There was no permanent injury. He was drunk. No. The explanation I give is, if he gets away with it now, it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse, and it's going to get worse. I've seen women come in with casts on their arms or legs. Please let my husband out of prison. Well, instead of breaking your arm next time, you might be headed to the morgue, ma'am.
Okay, so we have a couple questions, Jim, I want to get to. Because we're running out of time.
Yeah, okay.
But Mr. Deagle says that preventative law means you could commit a crime, so you have to prove that you won't. And I think that what he's saying is the people that are coming into the country, you want them basically to prove that they won't commit an offense once they're here.
No, I want the government to actively make sure that they're not on the sort of list that we maintain about U.S. existingly, under existing law, we maintain about U.S. Legal residents. No, I'm not saying that you're going to commit a crime. I'm saying the minute you show a propensity to commit a crime, we have a right to keep you out.
So
full stop.
Gary then goes on to ask this question, Gary Menard. And to be honest, this I think is the weakest part of both your position and my own position, to be perfectly honest with you. This is the area where whenever I think about how I would have my own personal immigration system, this is where the tension comes in my own mind. Gary said, so federal regulation of immigration is valid preventative crime enforcement that doesn't violate rights. And if that is valid at the border, it logically should be valid at the county-town line. This is where my problem comes, though, Jim. Because why is it okay for the government to preemptively interfere with freedom of movement, which requires the initiation of force? It's at least implied when they stop you at the border with U.S. and Mexico, but not at the border with Connecticut and Massachusetts.
Because we have the United States Constitution. We have U.S. laws here. We can know what the danger is here. We can know your criminal history here. In fact, they know my criminal history. They know your criminal history. Guess what? And they use it. And they use it in criminal investigations. They use it
but Jim,
your credibility. So
they can only use that when the situation arises.
Yeah, but I don't know. But you see, when it comes from abroad, there's a huge difference between states and counties and between a foreign government and not. The difference is between, and you could just concretize that. The difference between Massachusetts and New York, for example, say the difference between Yemen, Somalia, Russia, Great Britain, who knows where, okay? The fact is that they may think what we consider murderers and rapists are swell and should be able to walk around. Literally, there are countries who think that, there's no such thing as spousal rape. No, that dude's a rapist.
Yeah, but you'd have no way to ever know that, Jim.
That's right. So because Connecticut and New York are so radically different in kind between nations out there, we have a requirement, it seems to me, to do an independent investigation. They don't come in tabula rasa. In the United States, you and me are not tabula rasa. We've been vetted, in effect, all our lives. This is not true for adults coming in from abroad.
Jim, see, okay, the thing is, though, Jim, is I don't think we should be vetted all our lives.
But we are. It's called the criminal law.
No, I get that we are. We have Social Security numbers, for instance.
Okay, that is, but that's a violation of rights on the face of it of people already here. We are criminal law. If let's imagine a world of proper criminal law, that is still a constant vetting of people to see if they're a danger, if they've violated rights, if they have a propensity to commit more violations of rights. That is, and everyone's got a track record for that. My record of not being engaged in theft or violence, right, should be for my credit, and your I don't mean to pick on you, Michael, but someone else's record for committing rights violating crimes should be held into account every time the government is looking into them or going to take the step of prosecuting them. We're simply unable to do that with foreigners, simply because we have not had the ability to monitor them as we have everyone in the United States all this time. So we've got a bunch of adults who may or may not have terrorist connections, criminal backgrounds, contagious diseases. Lord knows where they're coming from. It's precisely because they're coming from this great unknown place. We can't pretend that they're tabula rasa.
Jim, I got a question for you. Would you be able to come back on? Because I agree. Persephone said this episode needs more time. Can you come back on to continue the discussion? I would really like for the audience to really, because their questions are important.
Yes.
Right. And I would really like them, when I ask questions, I ask the questions that pop out at me, but I want them to be able to ask questions. When would you be able to come back on? To
sometime next week. Let's set a day for next week.
I was so hoping you were going to say tomorrow.
Alas, I cannot tomorrow.
Is it because of that, Razi?
No, it is not because of that, Razi.
Okay. As long as it's not because of that, Razi. Monday, can you do?
Let's schedule Monday.
All right. So everybody, bring your questions. Do not forget them. Please write them down.
And if your question has been pending there and we haven't gotten to it,
right.
Write it down or...
Well, Persephone can do that.
Good.
So we'll remember the questions that have been asked. Please come up with more questions. I sent Persephone Jim's article. Persephone, can you put that on our website? She's going to. So if you want to read that, you can also submit questions ahead of time. Important topic. Jim, what I think is desperately needed is an entire legal theory.
Yeah.
That's what is ultimately necessary. I think stopping or starting at immigration. I understand why you did it. Obviously, I mean, but
it's
I think
the issue of recent months.
Right, right. But I do think that an entire legal theory, much in the same way that when I've debated anarchists who say that, self-ownership is the start of their system. And I tell them you need an antecedent moral theory in order to arrive at individual rights. You can't start there. I think it's largely the same with immigration, that we need a very big legal theory. All right, Jim, you know the deal. You're here, so you got to give the capitalist thought of the day.
Government exists for one purpose and one purpose alone. And here I agree with the Declaration of Independence and Thomas Jefferson and Ayn Rand, to secure individual rights. And that is it. And when government becomes violative of those rights, the people do have a right to overthrow it. Now, I would say if you have a basically decent legal system, you've got to operate within that system, say a system that does not have censorship, a peaceful means. No, democracy does not confer legitimacy on a law or on a system, but at least it provides a peaceful means of change. And no constitution can protect us from the cultural beliefs that are widespread out there. And so it is in the matter of education that change really happens. And capitalism requires us to have a legal code that recognizes individual rights within all of those parameters.
Thank you, Jim. Nobody really answered Persephone's question from yesterday, so Persephone might maybe banned from asking questions from now on. One of the comments from Zardo ZCYS is that common law, a man's labor was worth what he was paid, therefore there is no income. Value for value, income taxation ignores the distinction. And Jenna Kleem, Ironheart says that I need to be more radical and exclusive, and Jenna Kleem said she's still thinking about an answer to the question. Thank you all so much. Jim will be back Monday, and we will finish the topic. I think it was great. Jim, thank you so much for being here. Audience, thank you so much for all your comments and questions. Thank you for your super chats, your super stickers. Please join Persephone and I on Everyday Ethics, as we will be dealing with some objections to the objectivist ethics. And then at 3:15 p.m., and these are Eastern times, we will be dealing with crime, corrections, and culture. Everybody, thank you so much. Until all that, please remember to check your premises. Peace.